So normally the predator will come across as the victim, and they will turn it and invert it into the fault of the scapegoat, very much so, to shut them up from seeing the truth. And unfortunately, people believe it because these people have studied how to manipulate people. And this is why it's so important to have discernment. It's not just about listening to the words of people. It's also about looking at their actions. And if you look at today's society, some people think there's nothing wrong at all because they're living in their bubble. They've probably not had much hardship in their life, or they trust the government, or they trust all these entities and agencies because they've never had any reason not to.
Hi everyone, and welcome again to the Wounded Healer to Hero podcast. And we have the lovely Caroline again. And today we are going to be talking about the discerning scapegoat. Now, the scapegoat archetype is actually an archetype that I have not really worked with. So today I'm really going to be asking Caroline a lot of questions about the scapegoat. I find it really fascinating about the scapegoat and her experience, because it's one of the main archetypes that Caroline works with and helps clients with. So she has a lot of insight into the scapegoat. So Caroline, can you just share for those who don't know, you just give a brief introduction before actually you get into what the scapegoat is.
Okay. So, as you probably know, because we've had a few sessions already for, I think this is number 5. I'm Caroline Tobin. I'm a medium, a tutor, and a coach. And I specifically, as I started to develop, and all of us may be looking for our life purpose, but a life purpose, there are many. But one of these came as the more that I worked on my own shadow, there was just this, want for a better word, a download of information to do with the scapegoat archetype. And part of that journey was understanding, and that was how I was looking at the world, as how I'd been for a child. And when I understood this archetype, then I started to realize nothing was random, everything had meaning, and we all work with the universal archetypes, but specifically sometimes you will work with one particular very strongly that will follow you through your life. Now, this doesn't come as part of the Jungian, but this kind of tradition, but there are so many archetypes. So when we start looking at things that are universal and they have the same characteristics, then that's my perception, that we were looking at archetypes. And as I've said before, you can look at the tarot, and you could look at astrology, you could look at all these things. They're all working with archetypal energy. So legends, all this is all part of the universal consciousness. So that's how I would look at this as an introduction of the scapegoat. And you may have had this all your life, but what I found out in the last 4 years is that people that hadn't really worked with the scapegoat in their life, or it hadn't been prevalent, suddenly came up to being. So as we go through the scapegoat, you might start to recognize, you might not think about it as you growing up as a scapegoat within your family dynamics, but you might start to recognize it in a society way that you may have felt this in the last 4 years. So did you want me to kind of go through more about how I saw the scapegoat and how this works?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, if you maybe explain what, framing from an archetypal, just a basic level, and then how it shows up in your life, Caroline, that would be great.
Okay, so how I look, so where the scapegoat comes from, it comes from in traditional times where a village would have 2 goats. Okay, and what they would do, they would sacrifice one goat to the gods, and they would take all of their sins and ask for it to be put onto the other goat. And the other goat would be left into the wilderness with all the sins to be taken away from that tribe. So it was almost like a redemption, giving that to that goat, who would have held all of that energy for that tribe, and would be then be lost in the wilderness. So when you start to look at this as an archetype, what you'll see as it transfers into people that are born with that, you will normally be, if you're born into a family that's toxic again in a way, you will find that the scapegoat is the child that is the most psychic in the family. They are able to see the truth. They are able to see that which is gaslit within that family. And they're normally the ones that are healers that are trying to bring that family back to balance. But because they're so sensitive, and that toxicity that comes from the head of the family, maybe there's a kind of narcissistic frequency within that family. And again, I would call that an archetype, not so much the medical terminology, but more narcissistic up the scale, where they've had trauma and they've disassociated from that. So what they want to do is create a reality for everybody within that family to stop them feeling shame. So that's the narcissist. They want not to feel that. They want you to give them that adoration. But then you've got this child that can see the toxicity and what is wrong within that family, and they will try to make people aware. So what happens, just like that goat, that family led by that narcissistic head of the family will pour all the blame, all the sins of that family onto that child. Okay, so it's like a group collective then will gaslit that child, and it will be like that child is at fault and will take the blame for everything in that family. So they have feelings of being very isolated, where the rest of the family can go out into the outside world and put on a brave face and this glamorous face, and because the scapegoat comes from a place of truth, they can't fake that, and they look like they're the ones with the problem. Okay, so that's how much I would kind of say that in a nutshell, is people that will go through the whole of life accepting the blame when it's not theirs. So they've been almost programmed, and I would call that groomed from a young age, to be overly accepting of other people and their issues, and are willing to take on the sins of others, thinking that they haven't done enough. So you'll often find scapegoats will have this perfectionistic kind of energy about them, that they try so hard to be perfect so nobody can attack them, nobody can blame them. But it doesn't matter how hard you try, you will still get blamed for things. It will still be your fault, and it's very unfair and it's very unjust. But because it's a gaslighting and you are one against the many, then many children turn it in on themselves and actually start to believe that. So it can be quite torturous, because part of one of our needs is that we need to belong. You know, not only is it about safety and security and being fed, but we also need to be loved, and we need to be part of that tribe when we're children. Okay. Yeah. So what they will normally do then is ostracize that child. So that child has all the pain of that family, will feel all the pain of that family, and not belong to that family in a way. So it would almost, I would say, connect, even though I don't know much about the orphan archetype, but I would say there would be similarities there, where they don't belong to anything. And that is a very empty and lonely place to be in, when you belong to something, but you don't really belong, and your reality is different. But it's normally the strongest one of the family, you see. You can't break a scapegoat. They will normally be very rebellious. It may not be in an external kind of way, but they will not give in to that shared reality that the rest have. So what normally happens is there's a triangulation with other people. So they will use some, like with the archetype of the golden child, they will praise that golden child. They will be the best thing since sliced bread, because they have been groomed and they've accepted that reality of that toxic parent. Okay. So they get all the praise, and then they will gang up together in that triangle against the scapegoat, and the scapegoat will get the blame for all of it. And so it becomes a weaponized way of living. So that's in its kind of child. So it can be a very painful place to be. And what you'll find with people with the scapegoat energy is they are on a mission to belong. And it doesn't matter where they go, they will try their hardest to belong in any groups, whether it's spiritual groups, church groups, wherever they go in adult life. But they won't be able to stop seeing the truth. They see the corruption. They see underneath, because they've got those strong psychic abilities. And what you'll find, if there is toxic places, whoever's leading that will know straight away that that person sees the truth, and they will isolate that person. Okay, so what they'll do, and it's almost like that flying monkey syndrome, where they'll get all the people together in that shared reality, and that scapegoat will be the one who's actually seen the truth. It'll try to warn people, but people don't want that. They want to belong in that kind of that shared reality where there's that adoration, and that, where they're put up on a pedestal as well, because they're being groomed. Okay, so it's like that goat that goes around in the wilderness looking, to belong, but it carries the sins of everybody. But part of the journey of the scapegoat is that as they start to develop, so it's again what I said over the last couple of weeks as we spoke, withdrawing into that invisible world is very, very, very rich. And the point comes within the scapegoat whether they actually sell out, so that they squash these abilities and start to gaslight themselves just to belong. And I've seen this immensely, and I'd like to talk about this later, about what I saw within society. I'm just talking about it as an archetypal, and it within families at the moment. So they will have to either sell out in that way, or they have to be blamed for things, misunderstood for things they're not got at all. And it's like they walk in a different reality to everybody else. So there's that loneliness that goes through that. And it doesn't matter where you go, you seem to have that, where you bring out that exclusion. Okay, because you're dangerous, because you see the truth, and because you're strong, and because you are a rebel. But part of that is, if it happens over and over again, you can go down that pathway of selling out, or you can go really into yourself. And as you start to go into yourself, you see all the codependency kind of things that come up in you, where you want to be liked, where you want to attach, where you want to belong and not stand up and put your head up against the parapet. Okay, and it comes to that point, and to me this is where it happens in the heart chakra, and very much to do with the lover archetype, where you're starting to go away from the ego part of the journey, and then you're going into the soul part. That's the gateway, when you can look at whether you can still love these people without gaslighting yourself and selling out. And then there's that, I don't care what other people think about me, not in an apathy way, but because you want to serve, and that deep connection with spirit and that belonging that happens. It's almost like, if I'm not a very religious person, but I do believe in the Christ consciousness, and it's like that gateway, like Jesus that was on the cross. Okay, he was the ultimate scapegoat. He was here to bring a lesson. He was here to change things that were corrupt. And he stood in that gentleness. He had that foresight. He didn't, go into that space of belonging to his followers. Okay. He stood up. He put his head up against the parapet because he brought that divine knowledge. And then the dark forces come and sacrificed him. And yet he was still full of compassion. So that's that ego part of the journey of that, please God, why have you forsaken me? And then given yourself to God. It's almost like a symbolic thing. And that part of the ego dies within you, not the whole of the ego, but that part that's that codependent that needs to belong. And then what happens is, in that space, as you have given yourself to that energy, you'll find that there is no need to belong, because you are part of the whole, and you are holding an awful lot of power, spiritual power that comes through you, because you are meant to change things through that redemption. And this is something I'll talk about in a minute, but that's such an important part, that you now become that which holds space for truth, holds that for discernment, holds that for others. And as you step above that parapet, others can see you then of that same figure, and then they belong to you and you belong to them. There's none of that yearning to belong, but it happens naturally because you've let go of all those codependent, kind of wanting to belong, wanting not to be yourself to fit in, but you are actually really yourself. So then it brings your tribe to you because they can see you in that space. So that's very much what I would say, on an archetypal level, the qualities of the scapegoat is they're the truth tellers. They are very psychic. They're very intuitive. They're very gentle people. They've got a high level of wanting to do things right, of self-reflection and stuff like that. So that's what I would say about that, Eileen, just as a beginning and aspect of that. So would you understand, have you come across any of this in your own life? Or you may see it as I talk about the societal, it may make more sense to you if when we look at that.
So what I would say, it's really interesting because it makes you look at your own life where there's things maybe you never really thought about. And I would say probably, I didn't probably feel, I was definitely the more intuitive and whatever in my family, but I probably wouldn't say felt completely the scapegoat, but I could understand on some element, I can see it. But I remember one thing, you reminded me of a client, to be honest, of who alarmed me the amount of things that she told me that she would take the blame for. And what you've described there is just such, she was at such an extreme level that I was like shocked at what she, like where she was working, someone stole something, she said she did it, that this was the kind of thing that went on. And I'm thinking, why would you do that? So, that's really, really interesting. I remember, and she was a very quiet, discreet person. And I kept thinking, but how would anybody believe that she did do that? Because to me, I could see past that. But, that's really interesting because I remember seeing that and wondering what was going on there. So that's really interesting. I think what you've highlighted is that we've all seen as healers or light workers that have been awakened, that scapegoat, the societal aspect showing up, where trying to make many of us the scapegoat of situations because it's easier to do that. I mean, that's quite phenomenal when you're thinking about talking about the goat, and you know, and that extremely what it is very symbolic. And when we look at so many levels of what's going on at the moment in society, and also um would that also be when you think about like witches that were burned at the stake? Is there an element of that, Caroline? Just out of
100%,
curiosity.
100%. Because just we'll go back to that 100%. But just talking about your client, that was a really good point. That really goes into what you're talking about. Is the grooming that happens. So you may not see that, but they're groomed from a very young age to take the blame, that they almost become, you know, that's their responsibility because they've been gaslit. They do no longer know the reality of a situation, and they'll keep drawing that in. And sometimes it's better to just give in than to fight it, because they know there's no point, because they'll get the blame anyway. But going back to the witches and things like that, see, that's really important, because there was a societal change at that time. Christianity was coming in to this country very, very strongly. And I have no problems with anybody practicing anything. But when it goes to extremes, when it becomes very evangelistic in any ways, whether it's New Age, whether it's Christianity, then you know there's possibly an inversion going in there. And what they don't want to do is people that can see the truth, that have influence over others, because what you will see, and the witches would probably know that there was predators in that, so there would be an inversion of maybe, just for example, what was the Spanish one where they the Inquisition, where they just killed everybody, you know, anybody who had any mystical powers or any knowledge, you know, like Alexandria or anywhere like that, the library where there would have been hidden knowledge that was open for all humans, that that is part of natural law, that is part of divine law, is part of why we're here, would have been hidden. Okay, and then you would have got people that would be in the blame for that. So normally the predator will come across as the victim, and they will turn it and invert it into the fault of the scapegoat, very much so, to shut them up from seeing the truth. And unfortunately people believe it, because these people have studied how to manipulate people. And this is why it's so important to have discernment. It's not just about listening to the words of people, it's also about looking at their actions. And if you look at today's society, you know, some people think there's nothing wrong at all because they're living in their bubble. They've probably not had much hardship in their life, or they trust the government, or they trust all these entities and agencies because they've never had any reason not to. Okay, but what you'll find is people that have already had issues with them, with the government, or the, you know, or been scapegoated in some way. For example, the poor in this country. I see there's another tangent to go over after disabled people in this country. Okay, they're the scapegoat for all the ills of this world, and being blamed, it's your fault, rather than there's been a mismanagement of money in the last 4 years and lots of greedy predator energy which have given away contracts to their mates. Okay, so how can we blame somebody else? How can we gaslight everybody and get them all stirred up, and they're pointing the fingers? Who's the weakest part of society that could take that blame and can't stand up for themselves? People that are sick. So this is how it works. So they're gaslighting everyone, but it's really, you know, it's really easy to do. I've had it before when somebody's triangulated me. They've gone and they've spoken to somebody and been really nice about it, and just put a little seed in somebody's ear and then come back and said it to me. And they've come over really, really nice and just put that tiny little poison. And then you start looking at the person that they've gone to in the first place, and you're like, or that person doesn't like me. But it's a game. It's a game
Yes.
to cause drama, to cause chaos. And in that chaos brings out loosh, which is an emotional energy. Okay. And it can be good. So loosh can also be that co-creative energy that can come from love and high energy and things like that. It's what we manifest with.
Yeah.
But loosh can also be used in a negative way. So if somebody's trying to manipulate you and you are allowing that to affect your emotions, and you're going into places like fear, or you're going into grief or lust or things like that, then there's a whole amount of energy that people are able to draw off of. Because if they've disconnected from that God force, like I said to you before,
Mhm.
when you go to that heart energy, to that love, and you give yourself to God, if they've bypassed that because they want power, they've
Mhm.
disconnected themselves from that source. So they need your source energy. And if you
Yep.
are very empathic, and if you have a lot of light in you, and if you have, you know, the skills that I'm talking about, this compassion and this extrasensory gifts, then you've got a whole lot of energy within you. And this is why we need to be wise. It's not just about being open and giving, because if
Yep.
you're the scapegoat, you understand it, they're gonna try and shut you down in that way, whether it's from a family or what's happened. And I saw lots of people being shut down in the last 4 years. They may
Yep.
not have had the scapegoat energy about them. They may never have come across that at all, but all of a sudden it was their fault. It's like what I said to you last week about the mask. Okay, that was every right that I had as a sentient being, like those witches in times before, to practice how they wanted to the spirit. Okay,
Yep.
and be able to work in that way. See, with me, it's the breath of God comes through me. That's the chi, that's the positive
Yep.
loosh that comes through the breath. So when you start to stop things like that from happening, then you uh, very much are under that spell of what they're trying to do. They're trying to disconnect you from that, because they're not doing it to you because you're the rebel. But the people within your collective who won't let you be part of that collective, who turn all that energy, that's really hard to be the only one against the whole collective to carry on doing what you want to do or feel
Yep.
drawn to in your spirituality. So there would have
Yep.
been loads of scapegoats, or who didn't want to put a mask on and had to go on to work. And it was
Yep.
all their fault that they were contaminating everybody and stuff like that. So that's how I would look at that, Eileen. So there's many, levels to this. It's not just the archetype is very, very powerful tool to use against truth tellers, to shut
Yep.
them up because they don't belong. It's the fear of abandonment. It's that, it's that primal fear that we all have, that we need to connect. And I've brought this up many times in my teaching. When they've done experiments, when monkeys have been given, orphan monkeys have been given the a choice between going to like a makeshift mother who had a food, and one that had like a blanket that was comforting. Every time they didn't go for the food, they went to the comfort of the blanket, and they would hang on this mother, and some of them
Mm.
died. The
Mm.
need
Yep.
to belong is stronger than the need to nourish yourself. And so we have to be very mindful that some of these people, we've been very, very straight here, is on some of these boards that were creating the rules at that time. There was lots
Oh
of
yeah.
psychologists, and they had knowledge of how archetypes work and how to shut down certain people. So lots of people were thrown into that scapegoat role. It's your fault. You're to blame. And they gaslit everybody. They didn't do it. They got other people to do that and so it was a
That's that
very
triangulation, isn't it?
100%. You are the
You know,
golden child,
yeah.
and you are the scapegoat, and we are the narcissistic energy creating and pulling the strings.
And it's interesting what, they've done it on so many levels, as you say, but also came from different angles. So use different forms of this, in different elements of society. I mean, you just need to look at the amount of doctors that took a certain stand. They've been made scapegoats. Some of them have lost even their, for standing up. And it's interesting, you talk about natural law. I'm a great believer in that, the importance of us to be able to make choices that are from a spiritual but a natural perspective. I found it quite interesting, I remember when I first get ill, and it's interesting talking about, the benefits of the blame system, but also this kind of culture where the medical system want you, and they will do things to try and make you do what they want you to do. And I remember it was almost like, well, you'll not be entitled to benefits, or you'll not be entitled if you do not, or we refuse to give you any treatment or help unless you take something that had horrendous side effects, or it was an experimental thing, and then if something happened to you, it wasn't your fault. There's so many layers to this. But I think, there's so many light workers who'll be listening to this, Caroline, that can identify with this. As you said, a lot of them who never, maybe some of them will have seen themselves as a scapegoat. Some of them never but became the scapegoat on this journey because they did put their head above the parapet, and they were maybe blamed by their family. We're still seeing it in society. I can see where people are still very shut down and they don't want to look at the truth. They don't want to face the truth. It's easier to blame certain minority groups or certain types of people than face reality. And often that is an aspect of society. Sometimes the truth seems, it's so hard for people to face. It's easier to blame somebody else.
100%. And that's where we go back to that most painful place, is if you do put your head against the parapet, that you will be on your own. You will be in that desert by yourself, okay? Like that scapegoat, walking around, with all the sins in the world. But actually, there's a positive side to the scapegoat. With all archetypes, it's not just a negative, okay? Because the universe is a benevolent universe. It doesn't give us anything that is not for our blessing. It's for us to transmute the qualities that are within it. So from my perspective, as I look at this stuff, and this is the stuff that comes as I connect, so it may not be traditional, the way that the scapegoat is looked at, but I just felt very much that when you look at these leaders now, they will have used that scapegoat energy. They're very aware of it, but most of them are on the pathway to being a malevolent king, but they don't want to go through that blending that you go with spirit as you go through that heart chakra, as you go through the lover. They bypass all that. They want to go straight to power. They want your adoration. They want you to be conforming. Okay, they are the tyrant king. It's all about them. It's all about hierarchy. Okay, you're just on the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, but part of the scapegoat, you see, I believe the scapegoats are born to be the benevolent kings, and the scapegoat is those that are in training. They get it particularly hard. Everything is stripped away from you. Okay, everything is stripped away from you so that you can be humble in that there is, as you give yourself over to that power, when you go into that lover archetype, and you, just like Jesus said, like I put myself in your hands. As you do that, then you start to walk down what I would class the right hand path to service. You become that king that can hold space. But if you haven't sold out because of the wanting to belong and kept yourself small, if you go through that desert like that goat, Okay. And realize that you're actually holding those sins because you are this strong being for everybody, because they're not ready yet. And
Yeah.
you move into that space, then something happens that you become this leader for other people. You open up this kingdom, and people can thrive in that kingdom because you're not going to gaslight them. You're not after their power. You know what it's like not to belong. You know what it's like to be kept small. Okay. You want that other person to thrive. Okay. Because you understand, when you've gone through that process, because you've had the courage, that it's a symbiotic universe, that as I give to you, it comes back to me 10 times. I don't need to take it away from you. I don't need to go, it's mine, it's my work, it's my this, it's my that.
Yep.
This is my
Yep.
work. Take it. It comes from
Yep.
spirit, because you know why? It comes through me again and again, because it never ends. There is no, there's always abundance. You know, there is no lack in the universe.
It's
The
the
E,
channel.
there we go. And that's the part of the scapegoat. So whether you've had it as a child and you've learnt to be on your own, you've learnt to be strong, you've learnt to listen to your truth, you've learnt to listen to your discerning skills, okay, or whether you went through it in the last 4 years and you had to lose all your friends, or they didn't like you, or they whispered about you, or your family thought that you was mad. Look at you now. Look at the space that you are in now and the people that are around you. But you may be there now to hold that space for them to follow. You may be that lighthouse to lead them out of the desert. Okay. So everything has a reason. And this is what I'm saying. As you look at stuff like this, you know, you realize that you are the canary in the coal mine when you are a scapegoat. Straight away, because you're the truth teller, you know when something isn't the truth. And even if everybody tells you that you're wrong, you cannot help, because you feel it before other people do. You feel it in that timeline before other people do. Okay. But it's when you're a gentle and sensitive person, it's really hard to say, no, you're wrong. But the more that you do it, the more you become that king. So that when tyrants come, tyrant kings that want to take you down, you can hold that space. And that's what's happening on this planet right now. You're finding loads of people that went through that scapegoat, went through that lonely part of the desert, and they've honed their skills and they've looked at their shadow and they have devoted themselves to the spirit to be of service to other people. And you can see that they've become really strong in their kingdoms. And the people that they're teaching or the people that they're working with, they don't have to worship them and say, oh, you're such a great teacher. They become strong because that king isn't threatened by that. That's them being of service. They don't need to take down another person. So this is very much the gift of the scapegoat that's happening to so many people. So if you feel like the scapegoat isn't relevant to you, I'd ask you to look again. You just might not recognize it.
Yeah. And I think the more that you're seeing, you know, the more things you're seeing, I think people will catch on and recognize and see themselves. And I think it's interesting that the aspects of the scapegoat, as you say, where it has shown up, and that I've noticed so many, like what I mentioned in the last video, these people who were non-assuming or had always took a backseat to things, this scapegoat aspect has really pushed them to the front. And it's interesting, I think, too, when you talk about the psychic and intuitive aspect of being always kind of knowing things that other people can't, you know, can sense. I would say that's always been for me. I could see things before it was coming, sense things about people or situations. And people might think that, you know, why are you saying that? But, you know, for me, it would just be something that would come from nowhere. It wasn't, you know, in the mind, it would just become. And sometimes people can then challenge that. But I do find it interesting we're living in this society at the moment where everything is inverted. And, you know, those of you who may be feeling as if they're just waking up to certain things, this is when you have, if you look closely, this is what it's all about. It's the chaos, it's the confusion. And the people that they are blaming most of the time right now and they're making out of the problem are actually just scapegoats. They're not the problem. And I think if we understand that what is happening, that inversion, because I found a lot of things, even when you look at the wars and things like that, people, it is so inverted and people can't see that. You know, I know there is a lot of people waking up, but it is very strong in the collective, isn't it, Caroline? It is so strong at the moment. But as you say, the gifts, there is so much gifts in that, because you do, and it's something, it's feeding the soul. It's coming, it's not coming from the ego, it's not coming from the material world, it's coming from something deeper. And these are the leaders of the future, because what people perceived, I've always felt that most people, what they judged as leaders and kings and rulers, were very egoic. And it didn't resonate. Even in the coaching industry, I've always found that. I found it very hard to get even coaches that I felt aligned with, because the leadership was coming from a very kind of surface level. Where what we're seeing is these new leaders rising up. And they're the leaders that didn't really expect to be leaders, want to be leaders.
100%.
But and that's where it's coming. That's what a true leadership is. Someone who's been in the trenches, knows what it's been like, has went through the challenges, because you can't lead others. You can't be there as that knight or the king if you've not been at a certain place and you're there for the right reasons. And I think that's what is really rising up. So Caroline, thank you so much. It feels as if it's been really fast today for some reason, the session. It's been in so fast. Is there anything that you would like to add before we go?
Okay. So all that are listening at this moment that probably have kept a very quiet life, okay, or kept yourself small in that space, or thought, not me, not me. Think that you have been in training all this time, you know, and it's really important what you said about, you know, some of the leaders that you've seen, they've all wanted power because they've just been in the shadow of the masculine. Okay. But for me, true leaders have gone through that fire, and they've gone through that alchemical marriage from that lover archetype where they've given themselves to God and let go of everything. So the divine feminine is also connected in that, so that they care, their heart is open. It's not about power, it's about service. So all of the people that are listening that think, no, not me, yes, you, all the people that have kept themselves behind, who've had no interest in power, okay, you have been training for this moment, this Kala Yuga, to bring in these times. And I can see that it's starting to change a paradigm. All that went through this alchemical process in the last 4 years, I see the phoenixes rising now because they've done the work silently and quietly. And if you feel on your own, there are people here, you know, that have gone through that. So you are no longer alone, you know, and it's my biggest wish that these people that actually serve on that right-hand path as kings, the kings come together and bring that community of leadership without trying to take each other out or down, because that's what we're here, you know. And I hope that is part of that collaboration between ourselves, Eileen, because I highly value what you bring into the world, and you're definitely a king. Okay.
Oh, the same with you, Caroline. Oh, thank you so much again for an amazing session. So, Caroline, if you just tell everyone where they can find you and maybe your latest offering that you have.
Okay. So my website is www.divinitywithin.co.uk. You can contact me there. My email is inquiries@divinitywithin.co.uk, and I have Instagram, which is divinitywithin7, and my offerings are, you know, I'm just actually the class that I've got is full now. It's just started this week. But I intend to bring out other classes which help people develop these skills through the archetypes, through understanding their clairs, the clair, and for people that probably don't know what clairs are, how we interpret the invisible world through the chakras and things like that. So I'm looking at that, and also to bring out a membership site where we can really look at stuff like this. So if you feel that you have some of these archetypes and you'd like to work with other people that are humble and here of service, then please come forward. You'll be made most welcome.
Thank you, Caroline. And you can find out more about my work at eileenburns.co.uk and the spiritualmarketingclub.com. So thank you everyone for watching. Please like, share, and even comment. We'd love to get some feedback, and anything that you find interesting in our sessions, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Caroline. Bye bye for now.
Bye bye.